it up again. All the supply side will be fine. Everything will be fine. And when you've got DVLA, not processing 50, 60,000 HGV drivers, what did you think was going to happen? Yeah, funnily enough, there's shortages of everything and prices have to rise.
Finally, on a slightly lighter note, how much will champagne come down by?
Well, I'm not quite. I'm not exactly sure. You caught me on the hop there. I think that beer will be 3 or 4p only. I doubt. I'm afraid that most pubs and restaurants will be able to pass those price cuts on to customers because the price of pretty much everything else is going up. I mean, the cost of inputs and wages are going to be up 4 or 5%. Food and other supplies to pubs are minimum up 4 or 5%. So I doubt, unfortunately, that customers will see much of the benefit. This will just be one small part of everybody's business where the input costs have gone down. And we'll all be very grateful of that and have a few pints on it. But I don't think it will necessarily end up at the bar, I'm afraid, because everything else costs are just going through the roof. Sorry about that, Nigel.
You had to spoil it, Hugh, didn't you? You really did have to.
I am pleased about the price of beer. I'll be pleased about that. And I'm more pleased at the end of the day than I was at the beginning. But it's it's a tough market out there. It's tough for wages. It's tough to buy stuff. It's, inflation is coming and we're really feeling it in hospitality.
Hugh Osmond, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, our last guest to discuss this budget and what it all means is Dr. Gerard Lyons, former Chief Economic Advisor to Boris Johnson when he was Mayor of London and NetWealth Chief Economic Strategist. Gerard, good evening.
Good evening.
So we've got kind of Rishi. It's a little bit like Boris now, isn't he? It's just endless optimism, spending lots and lots of money and not really worrying about borrowing too much. Is that the kind of responsible economics we expect to see from a Conservative Chancellor?
Well, I think, Nigel, all budgets need to be put in the economic context in which they're occurring. And having had a deep pandemic that has hit the economy very hard, I thought he basically took the right stance today. The economy is improving, public finances have turned the corner, borrowing is clearly on the downward trend. That being said, as he said halfway through his budget speech, he talked about the fact that you need to judge people and chancellors by what they do, not just by what they say. And I think that's the key challenge. To actually build on this budget, the key issue now and the key question for the government is that they now need to deliver on a supply side agenda driven by the private sector and taking the burden off small businesses. So the good news is the economy has turned the corner. The good news is that he did actually increase departmental spending, thus avoiding the austerity, not just of George Osborne, but actually many of these departments didn't receive the spending they should have received when Gordon Brown and others, I think, were in power. So certainly the Osborne austerity is now no longer a policy option. But what we basically have here is that the Chancellor has to decide what to do. He's decided to borrow, he's decided to tax, he's decided to also spend. What we now really need to have is stronger, sustained economic growth. And you were talking about, Liam, growth this year and next year will be strong. The key challenge is what happens thereafter. Because even though the OBR, the independent forecasters, are optimistic for the next 24 months, they're pretty cautious, I would argue, about what happens thereafter.
I saw those years, those later years, 24, 5, 6, they're projecting growth back to sort of 1.6%, 1.3%. That isn't very good, is it?
No. What we really need to have is a pro-growth economic strategy. I saw elements of that today, but it really needs to have three arrows to it, three parts to it. One is monetary and financial stability. And inflationary worries are apparent. You've talked about that. The other issue with low and close to zero interest rates is that financial instability risks are high. People don't talk about that. So that's one arrow. That's down to the Bank of England. I don't think we should have confidence about them. Their track record to date is not particularly good. For the last year, they've been like the driver in the car. They've put the foot down on an accelerator, passed all the warning signs. Now we're at the bottom of a hill. They want to put the brake on. The second arrow is the whole fiscal side. We saw elements of that today. But as you've touched on, borrowing is still too high, albeit on the right trajectory. But the third arrow, the third area, is the one that we really need to see this government, and you would argue correctly that a Conservative government you would think would be very much focused on this is the whole supply side. We've talked about the big words today, innovation,
Gerard,
investment.
Gerard, isn't that really where Brexit comes in? Because doesn't Brexit free us? And Rishi did talk in that budget about Brexit being a good thing and leaving us free to do things differently. He just hasn't quite got round to doing them, has he?
That's right. Well, in terms of the UK, for 2016 to 19, we had the political crisis. The last 2 years, if you want to give credit, we've had the pandemic and we've handled that relatively well in terms of the economic side. But you're right, it's now about delivering. The OBR do not believe, when you look at their forecast, that there's any Brexit dividend. Clearly, you've just talked about the drink sector. There's a dividend there if you want to actually exercise it. I would argue there's dividends all over the place in terms of having Brexit now giving us freedom to set our own domestic objectives and also to position ourselves globally in terms of the future growth markets. So the challenge, as you've touched on, is basically seizing that opportunity from Brexit. So I recognise, in my view, that, and I've said the same as you've said earlier, tax take is too high. There are valid criticisms. The recent tax increases I thought were wrong, but the spending increase today in terms of departments was right to avoid austerity. We need to actually now make sure we actually keep inflation in check or ride that problem as well as we can. But also we really do need, and the Chancellor and Prime Minister need to be combined in this, deliver that supply side agenda. And it has to help take the burden off small firms who still have too high a regulatory tax burden and still do not have the banks lending them enough money. So that's where the challenge is, and that's where the opportunity lies as well.
OK, Gerard Lyons, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And these are the opportunities, of course, that we want to see the Chancellor take over the course of the next couple of years. In a moment, we'll talk about one thing that did come out of the budget directly as a result of Brexit, and it is an encouragement for the Chancellor to get the red ensign flying once again in larger numbers on British ships.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
Well, a high-spending budget was revealed today by Rishi Sunak, and we're still borrowing far too much money. And I'm just asking, can we afford Rishi? And by the way, I have to say, in terms of style and delivery, and what Liam Halligan was saying earlier, in terms of economic knowledge, you know, you probably couldn't have somebody more suited to this role. It's just the attitude towards money that I find a little bit bewildering. Your responses so far to this. Lorna on email says, can it be we have all this money to spend now as we are not paying into the EU's coffers? I wish I could say, yes, of course, because we've left the EU, we're all so much richer. But no, the truth of it is that the money that the Chancellor's spending is money that, in most cases, that we have to borrow. That's the point, and we keep racking up. You know, when the Conservatives came to power in 2010, our accumulated national debt that we'd built up since the Napoleonic Wars was £650 billion. It's now £2.2 trillion. So there you are, it's more than trebled. And you can argue that there's been a pandemic, but even prior to the pandemic, the Conservatives are not as prudent with money as they like to let you think they are at election time. Paul on Twitter says, unless it's coming from his own wallet, which I doubt. No, it isn't, but a fun answer. And Dan on Twitter says, in the aftermath of World War II, we spent and spent to get us back to growth and sustainability. The same must happen now. We did. And then what happened in the 1970s? We paid a heck of a price for it with ruinous inflation. In fact, it got as high as 27%. In 1974, and a lot of people who themselves have been prudent through their lives saw the value of their money disappear virtually during the 1970s. One more I'll take. Laura on email says, all these magic money trees will obviously create a magic money forest. Such an Amazonian forest will obviously reduce carbon emissions to net zero, but reduce the taxpayer to net skint. Well, on that note, I have been, since I sat here in this chair back in July, I have been saying that the rush to net zero, that the way in which it's being done is going to be ruinous. It'll lead to yet more huge transfers of money from the poor to the rich, and given that China isn't going to play the game anyway, by the looks of it, nor is Russia either, what's it going to achieve? And I've been sceptical. I'm not questioning the fact that 7.5 billion of us on this planet must make some difference to the environment in which we live, and there are many things that we could do better to have a greener world. I'm questioning the method by which we're going about this, and in the case of the Prime Minister now, what seems to be almost revolutionary zeal. He's pushing for net zero, but it's supported by all the other parties in Westminster. Massive, over 90% of MPs are strongly in favour of net zero. And yet, just like the European question, my sense of it's been, and growing sense of it's been, that out there in the shires, people are asking, hang on, who's paying for all of this? Are you serious? I've got an old Edwardian semi. It's going to cost £20,000, £30,000 to actually get it equipped for a heat pump with all the insulation and other things we've got to do. So the other day, in the Daily Telegraph, Alistair Heath, a commentator, he proposed, well, what about having a referendum on net zero? And extraordinarily, overnight, the Telegraph have conducted a poll, and 42% of adults said they supported a vote on the plan, 30% opposed it, 28% didn't take a view. Well, if you take out the undecideds, that's 58% say they would like a ballot on the issue. And that is very, very interesting. We're beginning to see on the backbenches now, one or two people in the Conservative Party particularly questioning what Boris is doing. Now, this proposal for a referendum, this idea that is being backed by voters, is likely to be something of an embarrassment to Boris Johnson, given that COP26 is just around the corner. But clearly, a lot of you out there feel this shouldn't be done without you being asked. And actually, this wasn't really what you voted for in 2019. But is a referendum on a specific issue like this actually feasible? Or should referendums really be saved for major constitutional questions? Well, joining me is Andrew Motford, Deputy Director of the Global Warming Policy Foundation. Andrew, these are quite surprising figures, aren't they?
Yeah, I was surprised actually at how much support there was for the idea of a referendum, but I share your concerns that there should be that referenda should be reserved for constitutional issues. What I would say is that net zero is so far-reaching, we could consider it as being of constitutional importance. Net zero will transform the way everybody in this country lives. We will all become immeasurably poorer, immeasurably less free. And when you start about less free, you are talking essentially about a constitutional issue, aren't you?
Well, I can just about see the logic of the argument. I mean, look, we're not Switzerland, but maybe being Switzerland wouldn't be a bad thing. Because I just sense, Andrew, once again, we've got one of these issues where Westminster is becoming increasingly out of touch with majority opinion. Let me ask you one thing. You study this subject, you do it for a living. What is it that's made Boris such an eco-zealot?
Well, of course, the story is that surrounding him, his wife and his advisors, the goldsmiths particularly, are pushing him towards this. Yeah, I don't know what goes on in Boris's head. He is the kind of guy, I think, who will go where he sees political advantage, and he may well see political advantage in following a green line. I think by the end of this winter, there will be no political advantage in following a green line at all. We are going to, we already see incredibly high energy prices, and they're running us over the winter. I think by March, April, greenery is going to be essentially poisonous for politicians, and everybody will be backing away from it and saying that they never wanted it in the first place.
Yes, politicians not leading, but actually in this case, it once again will be following. Andrew, thank you for joining us. And this is a story that I'm going to cover with you here on GB News day after day after day. These proposals are too bloomin' expensive, not fully thought through, and are going to meet, I think, a very big wall of public opposition. Now, my What the Farage moment watching the budget, and it was one of joy, was Rishi Sunak picking up the Brexit issue. Now, he hasn't done what Gerard Lyons is arguing for. He hasn't put in place those supply-side reforms to help small business. But today, he said in the House of Commons, he'll offer tax breaks to ships that fly our flag as a tribute to Britain's proud maritime history. The Red Ensign is coming back with tax incentives. That's what he said in his speech today. And I thought that was really, really interesting. He talked about the maritime history of this country, of what we stood for. I thought it was terrific. And he made the point that the previous rules that allow ships to fly any EU flag to receive preferential treatment, he said it didn't make sense for us as an independent nation. Wow. Instead, a new tonnage tax regime will reward vessels that fly the UK's merchant shipping flag. It's the Red Ensign, Sunak said. That is entirely fitting for a country with such a proud maritime history. The Red Ensign is also known as the Red Duster and is a flag flown by British merchant or passenger ships, and it has been since 1707. It's a civil ensign, meaning it is used by civilian ships, not military ones. It's been around in some form for centuries. And the wonderful thing is, he then made a joke, and he said, well, the Labour Party actually should be pleased that at least the red flag is flying somewhere. Let's see Rishi Sunak in the House of Commons saying this stuff earlier on today.
So I can announce today that our tonnage tax will, for the first time ever, reward companies for adopting the UK merchant shipping flag, the Red Ensign. That is entirely fitting for a country with such a proud maritime history as ours. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I am sure the opposition will be delighted that red flags are still flying somewhere in this country, even if they are all at sea.
Well, that was by far my favourite part of the whole budget. And you have to say, whatever you think, of his tax and spend policies, he is very good in the House of Commons at delivering it. And here's something, once again, that we couldn't have done as members of the European Union that we're now able to do, which, as you can imagine, is music to my ears. Now, in a moment, we're going to be joined by a Conservative Member of Parliament, Philip Davies. He is the biggest rebel in Parliament. Since he joined Parliament as a Conservative MP, he's voted against his own party and government 250 times. Now, we like rebels on this show. We'll find out in a minute whether you like Philip Davies.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christies.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
The GB News pub is open, and yes, we've ordered a couple of beers. They were threepence cheaper than they were this morning, which can't be bad. And joining me for this episode of Talking Pints is Conservative Member of Parliament for Shipley, Philip Davies. Philip, welcome to
Cheers.
the GB News pub. Very nice
Cheers, you too.
to see you. So you were there today in a packed House of Commons?
I wasn't actually in the House of Commons.
Weren't you?
I was watching it on the TV in my office. It's much more civilised though.
Right. Are there enough seats in that place?
No, there aren't. No. I mean, there's 400 seats. I think there's 650 MPs. So
right, yeah,
yeah. So it's better watching it in the office.
What did you think of it?
Look, he's got a difficult task. He hasn't really got much room to play with. It's the lockdowns, been terrible for lots of reasons, but obviously for the nation's finances. I don't really think any self-respecting Conservative can be happy with a budget that's put up taxes so much, and but probably within the hand he was dealt, he probably did the best he probably could.
But this was the Labour Party budget, wasn't it? I mean, let's face it, on most issues now, your cabinet are more like Labour were a few years ago than they are Conservatives.
Well, they might be a bit more like Labour were a few years ago, but they're certainly not much like Labour are today. What
are Labour like today?
Well, I mean, that's but I think there's no doubt the centre of gravity of British politics has moved to the left over the last 20 years or so on most issues.
No, it really has. It really, really has. Now, you're a serial rebel. You vote against the government on virtually everything.
It's not quite true, but anyway.
Well, I have a look at this quite a long list, So clearly not aiming for ministerial office, because that's not going to happen. And of course, you're married to Esther McVeigh, who, like you, fiercely independently minded and knows what she believes in.
Don't I know it?
Sure you do. What is the point? You've been in Parliament since 2005. What are you, Philip Davies? Because you're not going to become a minister. That ain't going to happen. But as much chance as me getting honoured, you know. What are you in politics for? Because you're in Parliament, you represent your constituency, and I get that bit, and that's an honour to do it. There's no question about that. But you're in a party that you're increasingly at odds with on some very, very major issues. What is Philip Davies trying, apart from having a jolly good time and upsetting everybody, what are you trying to do?
Well, look, you're absolutely right. I mean, I always say the one thing that me and Conservative Prime Ministers agree about is that I should never be promoted. And I don't want to be promoted. I said in my maiden speech...
It's not going to happen.
I said in my maiden speech I would never accept a promotion if I was ever offered one. But what I like doing in Parliament particularly, apart from representing the fantastic people of the Shipley constituency, is I like speaking up and saying things that I think lots of people in the country think, but hardly anybody in Parliament will ever say. And I think that actually one of the big problems with Parliament and you know, is that actually on most issues the majority opinion in the country is not the majority opinion in Parliament. In fact, often that opinion is never even heard in Parliament. And so I like speaking up for things, unfashionable causes you might call them, things that I think people in the country think, but politicians for whatever reason don't like saying. And I think sometimes that, you know, if I feel I'm saying something and nobody else in there would have said that, then I feel that my position in Parliament is worthwhile. And so that's really what I like doing.
No, fair enough. And I mean, if you think about it, you know, the whole European debate, and I got going on this, well, in '93, I sort of really committed I can't believe it, really, but you know, I started standing in by-elections and doing all sorts of things and trying to raise the issue. And I did that because I felt like you, that just Parliament was out of touch on this issue. There was a lack of real knowledge in the country. And I'm just pondering, Philip, over this chat in the GBNews pub. You know, we could have had this conversation about Europe 20 years ago. We could have said there's basically not a single MP that wants to leave, and yet a lot of people a lot of people in this pub think we were better off out. And in the end, we got there, and what a hell of a victory it was. I mean, it wasn't easy, but we got there. But I'll tell you something. On global warming, firstly, there's actually more scepticism about the science, I think, than people realise. A lot of people say, well, hang on, you know, what about volcanoes? What about sunspot activity? I mean, there's nobody saying, by the way, that 7.5 billion people on this planet's a good thing, in the sense that, you know, it must be doing something. So the scepticism around the science, I wouldn't say it's huge scepticism, because certainly anybody under the age of 35 has been indoctrinated, you know, without any sense of balance, and the same on the BBC and elsewhere. But where there's real scepticism is on wind energy. Where there's increasing anger is people realising over these last 10 or 15 years the amount of surcharge they've paid on their bills to pay to people like David Cameron's father-in-law, who owns land in North Lincolnshire and has got wind turbines on them, to pay big offshore wind companies. So there's a real, I guess the higher bills go, the more they say, hang on, we've been ripped off for years on this. And now they're telling me that I've got to, in my Edwardian semi, you know, install a heat pump, and it's probably going to cost 25 grand to get all the different building works done. And when the temperature drops below 5 degrees, it isn't going to work anyway. So I sense on this issue something's going on. And I know you spoke out about COP26 in the last couple of days. Just tell us what you said.
Well, look, my view is I'm not even arguing about the science, and there's people better qualified than me to talk about what's happening. And you know, is the climate changing? Well, of course the climate's changing. The climate's always changed, and it always will do. So people say, you know, the climate deniers and all this stuff. Absolutely not. I'm perfectly happy to accept the climate is changing, and that those changes will cause some difficulties in different places around the world. I'm fully accepting of that. My point is that I even find saying it quite strange because it's so ludicrous that the political class have decided that the solution to this problem is that we're all going to get together around the world and we're collectively going to change the world's climate. Now, that to me is as ridiculous as it sounds saying it.
Oh, come on, Philip. You know that if Boris gets the right agreement in Glasgow over the next couple of weeks, temperature rises will be kept to exactly 1.5 degrees centigrade. I mean, it must be right, mustn't it?
Yeah,
I know, it's nonsense.
It's unbelievable. And so my point is that we're literally on the verge of committing to spend £1.4 trillion in this country that we don't have, by the way, whilst also at the same time piling on costs onto consumers who are struggling already with the cost of living. And we're going to do all that in order to get our carbon emissions down from where they are currently, which is less than 1% of global carbon emissions, to net zero. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, China, India, emerging economies in Africa, their increase in carbon emissions each year, their increase is going to be more than our total. And so we're going to be pursuing a policy that we can't afford, which is absolutely futile.
Yeah.
Because of the actions of the other countries around the world. And people say, well, of course, if we do this, other countries will follow suit.
No, other countries will take advantage of it.
Well,
because we're handing them heavy manufacturing, we're handing them heavy engineering, we're handing China massive strategic advantage. I mean, I'm completely with you on this. But when you call your leader, your party leader and Prime Minister, when you say that his environmental push is utterly futile, virtue signalling, does he ever speak to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Does he?
Yeah.
What does he say?
Well,
It is before the watershed, so be careful.
Look, I get on very well with Boris. He's got lots of qualities. On this issue, he feels very strongly about it. I don't doubt his sincerity about the issue, but we just fundamentally disagree about the common sense of it. That's basically it. He thinks that this is really important. And to be honest, the majority of people in Parliament agree with that. I'm in a very, very small minority of MPs who think it's absolutely crazy to go down this route. The point I keep making is that, when people say, well, if we do this, other countries will follow suit. This is the same argument that CND used in the 1980s about unilateral nuclear disarmament. If we do it, everyone else will follow suit. It was absolute madness then, and this environmental version of it is madness now. And these countries are not following us; they're laughing at us, frankly. And China has been building a coal-fired power station every week. They've committed to build...
I think more than that, actually.
Well, they're committed to building 100 new airports over the next decade. And we're still in this view that if we just get ourselves to net zero and bankrupt ourselves in the process, we'll have sorted out the world's climate.
But how do we get change, Philip? Because we have a first-past-the-post system, which means in England, which is 86% of the population, it's Labour or Conservative. There's the odd scattering of Liberal, and there's no way of changing that. It can't be broken. We don't have referendums very often on issues. I mean, the Daily Telegraph have been sort of floating this idea of what about a referendum on net zero? And I looked at it a couple of weeks ago and thought, I'm not sure. The poll overnight's remarkable. Quite remarkable.
It is, yeah.
Remarkable that a majority really want to have a proper open public debate about what we're doing in the name of climate change. Do you think there's an argument that we become a little bit more like Switzerland and we have the ability to have referendums on key issues? Now, that would devalue, in some ways, the role of Parliament, but how else getting things changed in this country is very hard, isn't it?
Yeah, there's clearly an argument for it, and it works very well in Switzerland. Look, I'm a conservative for many reasons, and one of those is that, I like our institutions and the way we do things. I don't want to go down the route of having a referendum on things like this. I think it should just be for really important constitutional issues. I don't think we should go down that route. But the reason why I think the poll is...
You say that, but if we do that, it ain't going to change.
Well, we'll see. I think that the reason why the polling is so keen on a referendum is it's one of the failings of Parliament, because Parliament is not reflecting the views of the public at large. And I've always believed that for a parliamentary democracy to work, everybody in the country's got to feel that at least somebody's speaking up for them. And too often, they don't see that. And so I think that, we've got to do better in Parliament at making sure that everybody feels represented. But I do think things can change on this as well. And look, you're the expert in this. You got the biggest change of all, largely due to your...
By getting millions to rebel.
Yes, and you played the biggest part of all in bringing about that change. There were some of us who were little foot soldiers that had played a little part, but you were, you know this better than anybody. I trust in the great sense of the British public. I think they're always miles ahead of politicians on virtually every issue.
No, I agree.
And on this issue, I think there will be, it hasn't come yet, but there will be a massive backlash. When the real cost of this is discovered and people start to realise what's being expected of them, what freedoms they're having taken away from them, what additional costs are being forced on them, I think there will be a backlash of all backlashes. And to be perfectly honest, I suspect that many MPs and political parties, when that happens, will want to be part of that backlash.
We'll get the U-turn happening.
I do genuinely.
You may be right.
That.
I had a guest on earlier making the same point. What is it, Philip, with you and betting? You're one of the few MPs that speaks up in favour of gambling companies. You earn income from a global betting company. Surely, betting's bad, isn't it?
Well, look, my mum was a bookmaker when I was growing up in Doncaster. She had her own betting shop. And, I'm certainly not going to trash my heritage and everything that my background. And, look, of course, some people have a problem with gambling. And we should do everything we possibly can to stop that from happening. And when people do develop a problem, to help them get over that problem. Of course we should. But equally, people have a problem with alcohol. And alcoholism, any kind of addiction is bad. The question is, do we really want to ban everybody from doing something simply because a few people have a problem? And I don't believe in a free country. That should be the right attitude. What we should do is identify those people who have an addiction and have a problem and give them all the support and help that we need, whilst allowing those people who pursue their activities without any problem at all to continue doing so. Look, I'm as critical of betting companies for lots of things that they do.
Do you bet?
Yeah, I do. I love having a bet.
So do I.
Particularly on the horse. And, one of the issues I have with betting firms is that they often restrict the stakes of people who make money. And I think, that's, they can't have it both ways. They can't say, look, we don't want to restrict the stakes of people who lose, but we do want to restrict the stakes of people who win. So I can be as critical as the next person of betting companies. But I think overall, if you believe in freedom, then you've got to believe that people should have the freedom to pursue their activity whilst helping those who have a problem.
You are, without doubt, you are the least PC member of the current Parliament. And that's a good thing. I'm very happy that you are, and we need voices out there that are genuinely independent in their thought, and that's why I'd like to see electoral reform. I think we'd see more of those, but that's a story for another day. So what does Philip Davies now do? Because you've been in that Parliament now for 16 years. I did 21 years in Strasbourg, and that was way enough for me. But then everybody hated me there. Only half of Westminster hates me.
Might be more than that.
What next?
Well, I'm going to keep speaking up for my constituents on these issues, particularly where I think that the rest of the political class are not speaking about the issues that the people out in the country are. And that's what I've always tried to do in Parliament, and that's what I'll always continue to do. And I might be an unfashionable cause, I might be unpopular for doing it, but, it's no point being in Parliament unless you're prepared to speak up for what you believe in. If you're not prepared to do that, what on earth's the point in being there?
That was Philip Davies on Talking Pints. Quite refreshing in a way. The last section of the show. Yes, it's Barrage the Farage time. You send in your questions. I do my best to answer them. My guest sometimes helps, and I don't get previous sight of them. John asks me, do you think the establishment has been telling us we've got only 12 years to save the planet, are culpable for the behaviour of Insulate Britain protesters? Yes, you've got this ridiculous teenager from Sweden saying we're all going to die. No wonder they're gluing themselves to the roads, Philip.
Yes, I agree that it's gone way over the top. Some of the hysteria is absolutely
the alarmism beyond belief. Philip Davies should be, oh gosh, I'm not sure I can read this one out. Philip Davies should be the Conservative Prime Minister. Boris, leader of the Green Party. I agree with that. Well, the Boris bit, I'm not sure about him as Prime Minister.
No, me neither.
John asks, after the glorious embarrassment of the Brexit referendum, calling it, losing it, trying to stop it, do you really think the government will ever give us another referendum on anything? Because I don't. They're going to be very reluctant to. They're going to be very, very reluctant to, and that's really, you know, where I'm more of a radical than Philip. You know, I would change everything about our electoral system. I think we agree on the House of Lords. They're hopeless. They all got to go.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But affecting change in this country is damn difficult. I was part of a successful change, but it's not an easy thing to do. Right, I'm done. I've got questions about Poland being fine coming in and goodness knows what else. I'm off tomorrow. I've got a day off tomorrow. You'll be in the hands of Mark Stein. It will be brilliant. Don't worry about that. I'll see you back here on Monday. Next up, it's Colin Brazier. First, though, is the weather.
Hello again. More wet weather, I'm afraid, in some parts of the UK, with the risk of flooding for parts of northern England and southern Scotland. Very mild across the board with this southwesterly wind bringing